All right, so we're in Ezra chapter 8. We'll probably just look into chapter 7 a little bit. In actual fact, if we just look at Ezra chapter 7, verses 13 and 16, you can read it there. It says there, look, the situation is that the king has supplied everything for them to go back, all the provisions they need. And at the end, and he writes a letter, but and it says here in 13 to 26, there's all the provisions that the king has actually given to Ezra to take back, all the food, all the clothes, the gold, the silver, everything that they need really. It's all provided, right? And God has put it in the heart of the king to do this. And when you get down to the end of that chapter, get down to verses 25 to 26, it says, "And you, Ezra," this is what the king is saying to him, "and you, Ezra, in accordance with the wisdom of your God, which you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to administer peace to all the people in Trans-Euphrates, all who know the laws of your God, and you are to teach any who do not know them. Whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must surely be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment." This is quite stern and harsh, isn't it? So what's actually happened is God's promised, the king has promised them under God's direction to provide everything, but they're also being provided with not only the provisions, but a peaceful environment, a safe environment to establish themselves back in the land of Israel. They're going to be there in safety. They're going to have laws, and they're going to be able to abide by them. Anybody who doesn't, anybody who breaks the law, transgresses the law, is going to face harsh punishment. And so God has really put everything in place for them to go back. So we move on to chapter 8. I don't know if it might be worth, if you haven't read it, but you can read that letter that we didn't actually read through that last week of chapter 7, but you can read through there just to see what God supplied. But here we go. In chapter 8, verse 1, it says, "These are the heads of the family heads and those registered with them who came up with me from Babylon during the reign of King Artaxerxes." Now, this is actually what we're dealing with now, is Ezra's return trip, or it's his first trip down to Jerusalem. He's living in Babylon, so this is where we are. We're in Babylon, okay? And he's organising this coming together of all the people who are going to go back to Jerusalem. In verse 15, it says there, "Look, I assembled them at the canal that flows towards the harbour, and we camped there for 3 days. When I checked among the people and the priests, I found no Levites there." So before we go any further, we need to remind of something that we noted last time in chapter 7. If you just quickly look in verses 6, chapter 7, verse 6, it says this, if I can find it quickly. "This Ezra came up from Babylon. He was a teacher well versed in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he had asked for the hand of the Lord his God was upon him." Okay? If you just move on to verse 8, it says that Ezra arrived in Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year of the king. He began his journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month, and he arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month, for the gracious hand of his God was upon him. See, the hand of God was upon Ezra. I think it's the same in verse 28 of chapter 7. It says there, "And who has extended his good favour to me before the king and his advisers and all the king's powerful officials, because the hand of the Lord my God was on me." See, so Ezra recognised that God's hand was on Ezra. Okay, so we have to realise that God's hand was on Ezra, and we'll see that God's hand is actually comes, and it's also on the people as well who are going to travel with Ezra. So God is in control. But if we look at chapter 8, verse 18, just notice this as well before we go. Look, "And because the gracious hand of our God was on us," all right, "they brought up Sherebiah, a capable man from the descendants of Malai, son of Levi." And in verse 22, you'll see it, the same thing in this chapter 8, and in verse 31. So there's been a change. It's not just the hand of God is on Ezra, it's now on Ezra and the people. Okay? It now includes all those who are involved in doing the Lord's work. God's hand's upon them. Ezra was commissioned with the task of re-establishing Israel, you could say, at this particular time. And for that, to happen, the worship in the temple had to take place. It had to be done correctly. And as we look at these verses here, I hope we'll be able to see that God blesses the work, and he seeks to honour him, and he seeks to honour Ezra and those people, as long as it's all carried out correctly. Okay? It's done in honour, it's done in faith, and a humble faith. Okay, and looking to God, adherence to God's word, God's law, and keeping, we would say as Christians, keeping Christ at the centre. Back then, the Lord Jesus hadn't come, but they kept God and His law at the centre. As we sort of apply this to ourselves, we would keep Christ at the centre of our faith. Keep Christ the centre of our worship and centre of our purpose as well. Honouring God really is the main theme of this chapter, I think, as we look into chapter 8. Now, I just want you to try to imagine this, right? This is just something I made up, but just try to imagine this. There's going to be a great church gathering, okay? And we're all signed up to go, okay? And it's going to be in Israel, okay? We've all decided there's going to be a wonderful thing, and we're all going to travel by coach down to Israel. And it's going to depart, we'll say, from Colchester, okay? And all the coaches are going to leave in a huge convoy. Now imagine the logistics of that, okay? It's a big journey, and it's going to take, we'll say, I don't know how many days, 4, 5, 6 days, okay? And it's going to take 2 or 3 days for everybody to arrive in Colchester, for all the food, the provisions, and everything that has to be put there. It's going to take 2 or 3 days to arrive in Colchester. So you've got to find some kind of accommodation or your camp or whatever, but you're going to have to be there. And you're all the people are gathered at this departure event. You're waiting for the moment to leave. And then you find there's no cooks. We haven't got any cooks all the way down. There's no one to supply any food. So you have to search around and find a cook. In this case, you'll see it's not cooks, it's Levites. Okay? But you have to recruit the Levites and their families, or the people who are going to help the Levites. They've got to be transported to Colchester as well. And you've got to cater for probably another 258 men. And then when everybody is all together, you don't just board the coaches. Okay, you have a time of committing the whole thing to the Lord in prayer. Not only that, they actually fast as well to show how serious they are. So if we just read through some of these verses, you'll have to apply it to the situation that we find here. Okay, but that's the kind of thing that's happened. And you think of all the things that could happen on that journey if we went from Colchester to Israel, okay? You could get a tyre blowout, a bus could break down, somebody could be ill, we'd all need somewhere to stop off and, have a break or whatever. So many things to take into consideration. And Ezra's got to organise all of this. He's got all these people going with him. It's around about 5,000 people, I think we'll find. But it's a big thing for him to organise. Remember, they were going to basically do it on foot. So it was going to be quite a long journey. So if we just look at verses 15 to 21, right? He says, look, I assembled them, they're in Babylon, they're getting ready to leave for Jerusalem. I assembled them at the canal that flows towards a harbour, and we camped there 3 days. So you can imagine everybody's there, okay, and they're camping, right? And when I checked among the people and the priests, I found no Levites there. And although the Levites were not the priests, you needed the Levites to help the priest to perform the service in the temple. So that was essential that they had priests and to help the people as well. So I summoned Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jareb, another Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, and Meshullam, who were leaders, and Jorib, and Elnathan, another one, who were men of learning, and I sent them to Iddo, the leader in Casiphia, and I told them what to say to Iddo and his kinsmen and the temple servants in Casiphia, so that they might bring attendance to us for the house of our God. Because the gracious hand of our God was on us, they brought up Sherebiah, a capable man from the descendants of Malai, son of Levi, so he was a Levite, the son of Israel, and Sherebiah's sons and brothers, 18 men, and Hashbiah, together with Jeshiah, from the descendants of Merari, and his brothers and nephews, 20 men. They also brought 220 of the temple servants, a body that David and the officials had established to assist the Levites. All were registered there by names. And there by the harbour canal, I proclaimed a fast so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for a safe journey for us and our children with all our possessions. You see, so that is that situation that I was trying to, you can imagine it, can't you, what it was like. It's more complicated than a coach trip, really. They're all going to leave on foot. But I say there's no Levites. And they have to then stop and wait till they can recruit some Levites to come along with them on this long journey, because these Levites are going to be essential for the work that Ezra wants to do in the temple with the services there. With everything, it's it's all ready to go. And there's one little problem though as we go into the next verse, right? They're loaded up with provisions. They're also loaded up with finance. Okay. They've got gold and silver, by the bucket load if you read through it, absolute loads of it. The value of it is immense. And they were transporting all this money, but the one problem they got was they got no protection. Okay, so if we get to the next verse, he says, this is what Ezra says, I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from our enemies on the road, because we had told the king, the gracious hand of our God is on everyone who looks to him, but his great anger is against all who forsake him. Right? So they didn't dare ask the king, having said that, to send soldiers to protect them, because he'd already told the king that the Lord was going to protect them. So we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. So they're going to set out on a dangerous journey, going through a desert where they're vulnerable, with a huge amount of wealth and no protection, physical protection. They're going to have God to look after, but what they do, they fast, okay? Now, there's something we need to think about. I don't know what you think about fasting. Maybe we'll talk about it in a moment, but just put it through your head what you think about it. Just be thinking about that. Whether you think it's a viable thing, a good thing, a bad thing, or out of date, or valid. Just be thinking about that for a moment or two anyhow. So it says there, look, then I set apart, shall we read that? No. Now let me just say this. I was going to say in verses 22 to 23, we read that, yeah. Ezra would not ask for military protection, right? Because as I said, he'd asked the king, didn't want to ask the king, he told him that everything was going to be all right. But they were going into this robber-infested desert, right? Now, can you imagine you doing this, okay? You prayed and you trusted the Lord, but you know that you're stepping out into a real dangerous territory. You are asking a lot of people, aren't you, really? We say, we've prayed and we've fasted, but now we're actually going to go out there and do it. That was quite a frightening and courageous thing for these people to do. Because, if robbers come along, they're not just going to take the silver and gold. There's a good chance they might take your life as well. And the very reason that these people are making this long and difficult and dangerous journey was to honour God by worshipping him in his temple back there in Jerusalem. And they were going to do that by using the temple articles, the silver and gold articles from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar himself had taken away. And they're going to take them back and use them in the very place they were meant to be used, right? And it's one thing to ask the king for permission for folk to return back to sort of Jerusalem and then to find people who are committed to do it. If I said to you, right, we're going to go by foot down to, Israel, and it's going to cost you your job. You're going to leave your job here. You'll leave your home and everything you know that's secure. You think twice about it. And then if I said, yes, but we're going to walk down there. We're going to take a lot of money with us. There's going to be bandits all the way. You think, hang on, this is a step too far, wouldn't you, really? So you can see that it is a huge thing that these people are undertaking. And we're given a list of names of those who returned. And if you just look at those ones, they add up to about 5,000, as I say, compared to 50,000 people who went back on the first return. And some folks who've had a lot of time to study the Bible, and one of them is a bloke called Derek Kidner, who did a history of Ezra and Nehemiah, and it's published by InterVarsity Press. He suggested that they're probably, and I think it's probably correct, that apart from Joab, who's named in verse 9 of chapter 8, all of these people are connected in some way to folks who went back many, many years before. So they'd already got relations back in Israel. So you can see that was probably a help and an encouragement. But it does suggest that originally, when the word went out all those years before, that the call to go back to Jerusalem met with a mixed response. And we have to think, if you're living in Babylon, maybe the lifestyle had an attraction for some people, a worldly lifestyle. Maybe there was a sort of a spiritual decline amongst the Israelites who lived there as well, which meant they weren't so keen to go back, And so there was a mixed response, and it probably divided up families. And it could well be that many of these people who returned actually were the remnants of families in Babylon, and most of their relatives or family is back there already in Jerusalem. It seems that's possible that could have happened. But, so there's several different things that are sort of taking place here as well. But, there's still a lot of commitment to make this journey. Verse 23 says, we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. So what do you think about fasting? I don't know if anybody's got any ideas. I'm not going to put anything through. What do you think? Has anybody got any ideas about it? I mean, some churches have a day of fasting. Some people fast individually. Some people once a week, some once a month. And it's not like I don't think you can look upon fasting as I'm going to sort of inflict this on myself, and because I've inflicted this on myself, God's going to be lenient towards me. I think fasting is sort of showing God that we're serious about what we're doing. You know, we're prepared to fast, Lord, because we really are serious about the situation, you know. And although we know we can't earn your favour, we just want to show you that we are, you know, we're not playing about with this. That really does mean something to us. And so sometimes when there's things that are important, I think possibly as a church we ought to think about it. Maybe something's happened to somebody individually and we need to come to the Lord in prayer, and maybe we'd be prepared to fast. Some people don't fast even for a whole day. It might just be for a 12-hour period, but it's just a matter of showing that you are serious about what you're doing. Some people go for a day. My biggest problem is I can't sleep when I'm hungry. but you know, it's a serious matter, isn't it? You know, and I don't think from what the Lord Jesus said that it's out of date.
I think if you're earnestly praying for something, that you know you commit to that, and you really want something, praying for something particular, that's when I would.
Yeah, fast.
Fast,
Yeah.
To show God that I'm serious about what we're praying about.
And I think maybe one Tuesday night that's something we ought to do as a study. And then if we, you know, then we'll be, if we do need a time of prayer and fasting, then we're prepared for it and we understand it, because I think it does get neglected a little bit today, you know. So that might be something that we need to have a little look at somewhere along the line, and we can all think about it and all come up with how we feel, and that would be quite a good idea, really. But I don't think it's a Sunday morning thing. I think it's more of a Wednesday night kind of thing to talk about. But so thinking about fasting is, you know, something that maybe just bear in mind. Maybe when we've finished Ezra, we can have an evening on that. But Ezra honoured God, okay? Not just with the fasting, but he was extremely careful about all that was placed in his care, the people and all of these finances. If we just look in verses 24 to 30, and I'll read them through, it's chapter 8. Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, together with Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their brothers, and I weighed out to them the offering of silver and gold, and the articles that the king, his advisers, his officials, and all Israel present there had donated for the house of our God. I weighed out to them 650 talents of silver, silver articles weighing 100 talents, 100 talents of gold, 20 bowls of gold valued at 100 darics, and 2 fine articles of polished bronze as precious as gold. And I said to them, you as well as these articles are consecrated to the Lord. The silver and gold are free will offering to the Lord our God of your fathers. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, before leading the priests and Levites and the family heads of Israel. Then the priests and the Levites received the silver and gold and sacred articles that had been weighed out and taken to the house of our God in Jerusalem. So, do you see that? Everything's been allocated. He divides it 12 responsible men, and everything is weighed out carefully. It's all measured out extremely carefully, right? You know, the value of silver, as I say, the gold, silver was immense, right? And Ezra was concerned that when he arrived, I believe he wanted to give a full report to the king that everything he took had arrived. Okay, it was all there. He could account for everything. He needed to show the entire amount was delivered to Jerusalem. Nothing had been sort of removed because of greed or corruption. It was all there. Everything was divided up. It was numbered. It was weighed. It was recorded. And you could almost imagine some of those who were given the responsibility of transporting all of this precious metals and, you know, valuable stuff down there thought maybe he was taking it a bit too far. Doesn't he trust me? You know, doesn't he trust us to do what he's asked us to do? But Paul says in 2 Corinthians 8:21 that we must do what is right, not only in the sight of God, but before men as well. Okay, and that's important. We do that as Christians. We don't just do what's right before God, we do what's right before men as well. And if Ezra looked to be a bit casual with the way that he was, you know, with his accounting practices, if he looked a bit laid back with that, then some may have been tempted to think, well, I could take a little something and nobody will ever notice. But because Ezra had been so meticulous, everybody knew it would be difficult to give an account for anything that was missing. And so I think because of that, people behaved more responsible as they transported it. And, you know, I believe these sort of things have happened many times up and down the years in the church where people have been given responsibility for money. And it's so easy, isn't it? I think we can all think of various occasions, and I don't like to say it, but I can remember a horrible case back in Stone Market a few years ago. And it was actually on the news and in the papers, and it's very difficult to live that down when somebody who's got the response to the money, that goes in the wrong direction, probably to their own pocket, So we have to, whatever, it's not just money, it's all kinds of things, we have responsibility for. We have to be sort of accountable before the Lord, don't we? Jesus said, he who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. If you look that up in Luke 16:10, that very little thing he was talking about was money. Yeah? If you can be faithful in a small amount of money, then you can be trusted with the greater things of God. So we need to just sort of make sure that we're honourable like that. Someone who can be trusted in money, with money, can be trusted with the greater things of God as well. But Ezra was not just a man. If you read through this, when they get there, look, on the fourth day, in verse 33, on the fourth day, in the house of our God, we weighed out the silver and gold and sacred articles into the hands of Mermoth, son of Uriah, the priest. Eleazar, son of Phinehas, was with him, and so were the Levites, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, Nodiah, son of Binu. Everything was accounted for by number and weight, and the entire weight was recorded at that time. Everything was there, okay? And then the exiles who had returned from captivity sacrificed burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 male lambs and a sin offering, 12 male goats. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. They also delivered to the king's orders, to the royal satraps, and to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, who then gave assistance to the people and to the house of God. So everything was accounted for, everything was done in accordance, everything was done, right, and we see the benefit of it. It was all there and the people were helped. But Ezra was not just a man of financial integrity. If you read through this chapter, right, it was beyond that. He went beyond that. He was a man with moral and spiritual integrity as well. And I'm sure that was reflected to the people around. They saw how he was. And that is sort of some of the reason, because of how he was, that's some of the reason that God's hand was upon him. That's not all of it. But, God chose the right man. God chose the right man. God blessed the work of, as I said earlier, of those that seek to honour him by humble faith and honesty. And I think that's important for us to remember. If we go about what we're doing humbly, we seek to honour God, then God will bless that work. I mean, the thing is, God knows if we're doing it with the right intentions. We might not always get the words out right. We might not always make the correct action at the time. But God knows our heart's intention. If we're doing that humbly and honestly before him and before men, I still believe God will bless it and he can use it. Sometimes things go completely wrong, but God can still turn that round and use that as a blessing. And I think we probably experience things like that in our life as well. But you can see Ezra was a man who used his integrity, his trust in God to do what God wanted him to do. And that was a blessing for the people, and they went down there. Nobody could point the finger at anybody. Everything was accounted for. And because of that, I think the governors down there in Trans-Euphrates supplied all that the king had asked of them. You imagine if they got down there and the silver and gold was missing, and then he took this letter to say, now give us all that the king has demanded. They could say, we don't trust you with anything. But they couldn't say that about Ezra because he was trustworthy, and things worked out well. So that's good, isn't it? I think you can think about that. And we'll carry on. There's not much more. We're nearly to the end of Ezra. I think it's just one more chapter, and then we can maybe the next time think about fasting and come up with something there.